Good morning and welcome to another episode in the Green Transport Recovery web series, and a warm welcome to all attendees for joining today's event, which is a record breaker. We've had over 580 registered attendees, and I can see that there's nearly 250 who've joined us live at this moment in time. I'm Daniel Simpson, and I'm from Landor. I'll be introducing today's conference and our speakers. This is the second event in a two-part webinar series, which has been organised with the DFT relating to the Emergency Active Travel Fund. Last week's event provided an overview on the rapid cycleway prioritisation tool. If you missed that episode, or in fact any of the events in the Green Transport Recovery series, you can watch them all back on demand on the Landor Links Live YouTube channel, or by visiting our website, which is transportextra.com. So today's event will cover the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit, or AMAT. And yeah, we thank the DFT for organising these events and making the time to present during these incredibly busy times. So thank you so much. Today's speakers, we will have Jeremy Clark from the Department for Transport and his colleague Fraser Quelch, also of DFT. And then finally, the last section of the event will be facilitated by Rabina Nawaz, who's the stakeholder and engagement lead at DFT. She'll be facilitating the Q&A that follows after the presentations. We're planning for around 45 minutes for the questions and answer session, so please use the question box on your browser any time to raise a question during the presentations. This event is being recorded and will be made available along with all the slide material later this afternoon. Okay, so we're now ready to start. I'll hand over to Jeremy and Fraser to begin the presentations. Thank you. Take it away when you can.
Hi, Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Okay, right. Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. So as Daniel says, we're going to be talking about the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit and how it can be used to assess active travel schemes, and how we're proposing it to be used to assess schemes being put forward to the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So the reason I wanted to organise this webinar is that I've had a number of conversations with people from local government about the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and I know that people have some concerns about the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit being used for the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So I know that I've had some feedback from people asking, is it suitable for all types of schemes, like area-wide schemes? Is it proportionate for this to be used, given that I know that people in local government are under a lot of pressure. What with trying to, what with potentially having to deliver investments from the first tranche of the Emergency Active Travel Fund at the same time as bidding for the second. So what I really wanted to talk through with you is about why it's so important that we have some evidence that proposed schemes being put forward to deliver value for money, but also to try and give you some reassurance that actually over the last 12 months we've been doing a lot of work to try and make the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit as simple as possible for people to be using. And so hopefully at the end of this session you'll come out with a kind of an overview of what the tool is and an understanding of what you need to do to actually use it, and hopefully some reassurance that it's not going to be too burdensome to be using it. So in terms of the sections we're going to cover, so firstly we're going to talk about what appraisal is required for the Emergency Active Travel Fund. Then why do we need to assess value for money? What is AMAT, and how can I use it? How is DFT assessing congestion impacts for this fund? Then finally, and probably most importantly, where can I find more guidance to help me? Could I have the next slide, please? Hello, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Emergency Active Travel Fund, as I'm sure that most of you are aware, our Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, announced the Emergency Active Travel Fund on the beginning of May. So this represents a fund of £225 million for active travel, with the aim to rapidly increase the number of people walking and cycling, help to relieve pressure on buses and rail, given the capacity constraints imposed by social distancing, and to try and achieve a green restart as we come out of lockdown, encouraging people to think about active travel rather than using the card by default. The Emergency Active Travel Fund is being delivered in 2 tranches. So tranche 1 of £45 million, we've already received bids, and we're due to be making an announcement shortly what funding will be allocated. And then soon after that, we will be sending out letters to authorities, setting out what information that we will need for tranche 2 in order to review bids, in order to allocate money for this. Both on the department's already published on the internet indicative funding allocations for both tranches of funding, but I think it's important to recognize that the actual funding that we provide may be higher or lower than these indicative allocations, based on not only on the extent to which schemes are consistent with the objectives of the funds, but also for tranche 2, whether proposals are likely to deliver value for money. So, as I say, that the first tranche of bids have already been received. There was no requirement to assess value for money for the first tranche, because the aim of it was to quickly deliver funding to primarily for temporary measures in order to rapidly increase cycling and walking. However, for the second fund, which is around 180 million, this is also going to be funding not just temporary but also some permanent measures. And so, given the large amounts of money which are being provided, and given the longer duration of the schemes, we're going to need some more evidence to be able to justify that these investments are going to represent value for money to the taxpayer. So, recognizing that you guys
I think we may have lost Jeremy's audio there. Fraser?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if you would be able to pick up on these points whilst Jeremy's audio comes back online.
Yes, sure, that's fine. I guess we can move on to the next slide, which I was going to take over anyway.
Emmy, excuse me.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Sorry, we lost you for a few seconds.
Okay, so what I will do, I'm very sorry for everybody on the line. I'm going to dial into this so that you don't lose me again. I'm really sorry for the delay. We've been having various kind of tech issues with this.
Okay.
Can you now hear me? Is it okay?
Yeah, we can hear you on both lines, so you might just need to mute yourself on the phone you were using beforehand.
That's absolutely fine. Great. So sorry. So as I was saying, that given we know we need to be proportionate in what we're asking of you for the second tranche of funding, we're only asking that appraisals are undertaken for permanent schemes costing £2 million or more. So by a scheme, what we're talking about is a package of measures with the same objectives. So a scheme along a specific route might be a new cycleway and signage and junction improvements, all to increase cycling along that route. Alternatively, an area-wide scheme might be a package of measures over a more geographically dispersed area to, for example, junction improvements in order to improve cyclist safety. So for those schemes which require an appraisal, what we're going to ask is that people complete the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit and then provide us with some high-level information about traffic flows and capacity on those roads, so we can do a very kind of simple assessment of the potential impact that the scheme could have for motorists. So what Fraser and I are going to be talking about is how can you actually, what information do you need to input into the AMAT, and then what information do you need to provide us to assess these congestion impacts. So I want to the final thing to mention is that while we're only requiring appraisal for schemes that cost £2 million or more, we're strongly encouraging that people undertake a value for money assessment for other schemes as well, and this could potentially have inform the funding decisions that are made. So I'm now going to hand over to Fraser. I can't see the slides anymore, so Fraser, do you want to now move on to the section about the importance of appraisal and value for money?
Yep, thanks, Jeremy, and hi everyone. It's great that so many of you could join this morning. I think I'm going to start off by briefly explaining what appraisal is and why we use it to inform active travel investments, and I'm going to show you how the department uses appraisal to assess value for money, and then I'm going to move on to kind of give you a brief overview of the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit before handing back to Jeremy to talk through some of the inputs that you're required to fill into AMAT as part of the bids for the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So firstly, just to kind of give you a definition of what appraisal is. So appraisal is a form of analysis to estimate the impact of interventions on society. So this is in terms of understanding the costs and benefits that occur as a result of an intervention, and is ultimately used to determine whether an intervention is likely to offer value for money, and if so, to what extent. So in the context of active travel, appraisal is often used to understand the likely impact of delivering new cycling and walking infrastructure. This impact of the investment, understanding this impact of schemes provides a key piece of evidence to support active travel investment decision by the government. And I'm just going to quickly talk through some of the key reasons of why appraisal is important and how we use it within governments. So firstly, it ensures government spending delivers value for money. So essentially, this is determining whether a scheme is an appropriate use of public resources. So before the investment decision is actually made. So obviously, we want to ensure that the benefits generated by the scheme outweigh the costs incurred. So where this is not met, there isn't a strong case for the investments. And then the second important point is that it helps us to prioritise spending. In all cases, there's going to be a large range of possible cycling and walking interventions, but there's only a finite pot of funding. So appraising the schemes enables us to compare the relative impacts of different schemes enabling decision makers to decide how to best allocate the finite pot of funding, which in the case of appraisal is the aim is to maximise the value for money. One point to kind of highlight is I think that whilst it's kind of really important for us in governance, it's also a helpful tool for local authorities. It provides them with the opportunity to provide objective analysis to make the case for the government investment. So yeah, it's essentially a good way of showing kind of what the benefits can be generated from a scheme. However, appraisal is only one part of a wider business case. So it's used to develop the economic case. And this is only one part of the DFT's 5-case business case model. So there's the economic case, strategic, commercial, financial, and management case, all of which feed into deciding, helping inform decisions on investment. So how does the DFT assess the value for money? A fundamental part of appraisal is to quantify the impacts in terms of the benefit cost ratio. So as I'll explain, this is kind of the fundamental purpose of the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit, to kind of have an output of a BCR for a particular scheme. So once we have a BCR, this kind of gives a good starting point to determine kind of the likely value for money of a particular scheme. So as you can see in the table in the slide, the department has some default value for money categories, which range from very poor, so less than 0, to very high, so with a BCR of greater than 4. So where a BCR is less than 1, the monetized cost outweigh the monetized benefits, indicating investment offers poor or very poor value for money. Whilst if the BCR is greater than 1, monetized benefits outweigh the monetized cost, indicating that there's some value for money with a category ranging between low and very high. However, the benefit cost ratio is only for the starting point of determining the value for money category. There's some other considerations that need to be made. For instance, it's not possible to include all of the costs and benefits in the calculation of the benefit cost ratio. In many cases, we don't have sufficient evidence to quantify many of the impacts. As a result, when we decide the value for money of a particular scheme, we take into account kind of what the wider considerations of non-monetized costs and benefits. Also, there's always going to be some kind of risk and uncertainty when doing appraisal. So when there's significant risk and uncertainty, we can adjust the value for money category to take that into account. So yeah, the key thing is that the benefit cost ratio is only kind of one part of the kind of wider picture of value for money, and we should make sure we kind of include, we always make sure include considerations of non-monetized cost and benefits and the risks and uncertainties. So now I'm just going to move on to give you an overview of the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit. So this is a spreadsheet, so Excel spreadsheet-based tool published by the Department of Transport. The aim of the tool is to provide local authorities and scheme providers an easy way or a simple way to appraise active mode schemes. It does this by applying methods approved by the department to quantify and monetize the key impacts of a proposed scheme. The most significant element of the tool being the calculations to monetize the benefits that are generated by the scheme, which I will kind of run through what it covers. And this is, and kind of just to highlight, as Jeremy kind of already mentioned, we've been doing quite a lot of work over the last year or so to update our Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit. And at the end of May, we released a new version of the tool alongside what we think is a comprehensive user guidance, which provides step-by-step guidance of how to use the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit. Both of these updates were intended to make it a lot more user-friendly and less burdensome on kind of the users. Yeah, which we hope can make the process of the Emergency Active Travel Fund kind of even simpler. Okay, so what is the purpose of AMATs? As I said, the primary purpose is to estimate a benefit cost ratio for walking and cycling schemes, and this is kind of the key output of the tool, and it kind of provides a starting point of determining a value for money of the scheme, as explained earlier. It makes it simple to appraise schemes. So without this tool, there wouldn't be a simple way of estimating the benefits generated from particular schemes. It's intended to calculate these benefits and the benefit cost ratio using some relatively simple inputs into the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit. And it's designed to ensure consistency with the active mode, the transport appraisal guidance or tag. We have a specific unit in the transport appraisal guidance which focuses on active mode appraisal, and this outlines all of the methods to calculate the benefits generated from increased cycling and walking, and this tool essentially applies all of those methods into a spreadsheet, which are all hidden behind the scenes of the spreadsheets. So it kind of creates a consistent basis of using the same method, and on a similar pace, it creates a kind of even playing field between local authorities, so that you would all have access to this tool, which enables you to estimate the benefit cost ratio, all of which kind of are consistent with the guidance that we provide. As mentioned, Jeremy's going to go through all of the inputs of AMAT, but I just wanted to show you the output page that we get from the spreadsheets. So this is just to kind of show what kind of information you can get from the tool. As mentioned, the kind of headline output is the benefit cost ratio. So in this case, indicating a 2.8, which would fall under the high value for money category. But it kind of lists a long list of impacts generated from cycling or walking investments. And just to summarize what those investments are, what those impacts are, the toolkit quantifies 4 key benefits generated from cycling and walking interventions. So these can be characterized as improved health. So we know that physical activity reduces the risk of premature death. So we have a method that calculates what the reduction in risk of premature death will be. So it partly estimates the health benefits. There's another one which is improved journey quality. So cyclists and walkers obviously value elements of perceived safety or comfort when provided with cycling or walking interventions, such as new infrastructure. And this benefit recognises that there's a preference between kind of no provision versus kind of new infrastructure. The third key benefit is reduced absenteeism. So physical activity results in fewer working days lost due to sickness, and kind of less days absent results in kind of higher outputs. So this is a benefit to employers in terms of improved productivity. And then finally, the last key benefits generated from the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit is the benefits from mode shift. So modes such as cars obviously result in costs such as air pollution and congestion. By increasing the amount of cycling and walking, there's results in a mode shift away from car use to an active mode. reducing, and which is results in reducing the cost from cars. And then finally, just to kind of to highlight, as we discussed, as I mentioned in the an earlier slide, we want, when we do kind of do appraisals, we also want to take into account the non-monetized costs and benefits, and we recognise that AMAT doesn't quantify all of the impacts of a active mode investment. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key points, some of the key impacts that are currently missing from AMAT. So firstly is mobility impacts. So this is recognising that only the reduction in the only health benefit currently included in AMAT is the reduction in premature death. And there's evidence to show that active travel and physical activity resulting in improved journey quality, improved quality of life because of reduced reduction in the prominence of health conditions. Currently, the health benefits in AMAT only covers the benefits to adults, so over the age of 18. There will be a benefit to children, but which it currently isn't monetized. And finally, the last benefit on this list is the safety impact from infrastructure and active travel. So AMAT only calculates the reduction in car accidents as a result in mode shift to active modes from car use. It doesn't capture the net change in cycling and walking incidents. So to give you an example, for cycling, infrastructure is likely to improve safety, resulting in less accidents. But if you're encouraging more people to cycle, it could result in an absolute increase in the number of accidents. So this would be looking at them. It doesn't account for the net impact of cycling accidents. And then the last point, which Jeremy is going to pick up on, is that AMAT doesn't currently take into account the congestion impacts for motorists as a result of reducing road space for motorists. And then, so just to reiterate, I guess, is like if significant for a scheme, we would obviously want bidders to kind of report it as a non-monetized impact.
We've got about 5 more minutes left, Fraser, before we start the Q&A, just to give you a heads up, okay?
Great, thanks. I'm at the end of my section now, so just passing back to Jeremy now.
Brilliant, thank you, Fraser. Fraser, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Brilliant, good stuff. So I'm going to be another 10 minutes, Daniel. So, I'm going to now talk through what inputs you need to put into AMAT in order to actually use it for your schemes. So if you could go on to slide 14, please, Fraser. As Fraser says, that AMAT is a Excel-based tool. So there are 2 sheets in AMAT which you need to complete in order to use it to appraise your schemes. Firstly, the user interface intervention sheet, which includes which requires various details about the scheme itself. So, for example, where is it, and what type of cycling and walking infrastructure is there already, or what new infrastructure is being proposed, and crucially, the number of cycling and walking trips with and without the scheme. Then secondly, there's the user interface cost sheet, which requires details about the scheme cost by year, including not just the upfront cost of building it, but also any costs associated with maintenance and renewals. As I was saying earlier, we've been doing quite a lot of work over the last 12 months to try and make AMAT as simple as possible for people to use. And one of the things that we've done is that we've pre-populated a number of the cells with default assumptions which basically means for most schemes, these assumptions should be absolutely fine, and you won't need to change them. So it reduces the amount of information that you need to input into it to actually use it. So these are things like what's the average distance for cycling walking trips, and what's the average speed, and that kind of thing. If these assumptions aren't appropriate for your scheme, then you're absolutely entitled to change it, as long as you're setting out next to it why the assumption wasn't appropriate and what new data you provided. So hopefully that simplifies the process. Of those that information which you do need to include, I think most of it should be readily obtainable. So it should be readily obtainable as part of just designing a scheme. So a lot of the information is like, where is the scheme? How much does it cost? What infrastructure are you proposing? All these types of things should be fairly straightforward to you. I think the only two inputs which actually require a bit of simple analysis are estimates for the with and without scheme numbers of trips. So what I wanted to talk through is what data do you need to input for those? What analysis do you need to do to estimate those? So if you can move on to the next slide. So how do I estimate cycling and walking trips without the scheme? AMAT requires an input for, it requires users to input the number of cyclists and walkers that would use the routes being improved or the area being improved without the scheme. The reason for this is that a scheme can potentially improve journey quality for existing walkers and cyclists. And so one of the things to quantify is that journey quality benefit to existing users. We're only asking for AMAT to be completed for the permanent cycling and walking schemes being put forward to the National Travel Fund. Given these schemes are likely to be around for a decade or more, we assume that over that period, cycling and walking would return to pre-COVID levels unless there's government intervention. As a consequence, to estimate this without scheme trips, what we want you to do is provide estimates for the number of trips along that route or in that area before COVID-19 started. There are a couple of sources that you can use to determine this. Firstly, if your scheme is along a particular road and you've got roadside counts, that's the kind of preferred evidence. Alternatively, if that's not available, but your scheme is along a particular road, there's data from the 2011 census which can help you estimate the number of people that are walking or cycling along a particular road. So, for example, the propensity to cycle tool takes data from the census for where people live, where people work, what mode of travel they use to get from home to work, and then uses a routing algorithm to predict what's the most likely route that they take. And so it uses all that information, and it can estimate the number of cyclists that are commuting using a particular route each day. So in the picture I've got in this slide, you can see that on the particular road selected, the PCT tool, propensity to cycle tool, estimates that there are around 170 cyclists who would use that each day. So that provides one simple way you can estimate number of walking and cycling trips, and then you need to rate that up. So you double it to account for there and back trips, and then you rate it up again to account for the fact that there are a whole range of different reasons for why people cycle or walk, not just for commuting. And we've set out how you do that in the guidance. So for cycling trips, you multiply cycle commuting trips by 3 to get all cycling trips. So hopefully for route-based schemes, it's not too difficult, and the data shine tool is another tool that you can use, which you can estimate walking trips without the scheme along a given route. For area-wide schemes, it's a little bit more a little bit more challenging, but there are a couple of approaches you can use. I mean, I think the simplest one is that if you just assume that there are so for area-wide schemes, you need to estimate the number of people cycling and walking in the area of the scheme, but without the scheme. And the simplest way to do that is to input into the model that there are 0 cycling and walking trips without the scheme, and just check if the benefit cost ratio is already over 2, then we know that the scheme is likely to deliver value for money, even when we're not accounting for benefits for existing users. So if that's the case, then that's job done, and we just need to report that there are these extra benefits to users which we haven't been able to quantify. This is all set out in the guidance, so if you go, I'm happy to talk about it further in the Q&A. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So then the second question is, how do I estimate cycling and walking trips with the scheme? So the difference between the number of cycling and walking trips with and without the scheme is one of the most important assumptions going into AMAT, as it represents the uplift in cycling and walking generated by the scheme itself. What AMAT seeks to do is to quantify the benefits associated with all these extra cycling and walking trips being made. So, for example, as Fraser was saying, the health benefits to people from doing more active travel, the environmental and decongestion benefits from fewer car trips. Historically, estimating the uplift in cycling and walking trips has been one of the most challenging things to determine. And historically, we've asked people to estimate this by identifying a similar scheme to the one that is being proposed, and then and using evaluation evidence from that scheme to estimate the uplift in cycling for your particular scheme. I'm aware that this is quite time-consuming and challenging for people to assess. So what we've done is we've developed a simple uplift tool which can calculate, can estimate the number of additional cycling and walking trips generated by the scheme. So we're going to be sending this out alongside the letter which is sent to authorities. But in brief, all you need to do is to use this is to input into this data for the scheme cost, infrastructure type, location, and the kilometers or units of infrastructure provided. So again, it should all be very, very easily obtainable information, and the tool will estimate how many cycling and walking trips are generated. I'm happy to talk in more detail about this later, but this tool we undertook a extensive literature review of evaluation evidence for cycling and walking schemes to estimate the average cost per additional stage for different infrastructure types. So for cycle parking schemes and stations, you can see in the table that we've estimated on average it costs about £14 to generate one additional cycling stage per year. So we can use that information and adjust it based on the cost of the scheme, but also on its location, taking into account that investments in certain places may generate more trips per pound than in others. Can you move on to slide 18, please? So that's a summary of what what inputs need to go into AMAT. The other thing to mention is that as part of assessing bids for tranche 2 of the Reactive Travel Fund, we also want to assess whether schemes could have a material impact on congestion for motorists. So as Fraser was saying, part of the objective of value for money assessment is to understand the kind of the winners and losers across society, and to understand the kind of the overall benefits of a scheme, taking into account all of the kind of key impacts. And given that one of the aims of this fund is to reallocate road space to cycling and walking, we want to be able to understand to what extent could this impact on motorists in order to come to an overall view of value for money. Again, as Fraser was saying, this isn't currently quantified in the AMAT. So what we've developed is a very simple approach that we can assess these congestion impacts. What's required from bidders is provide some basic information about traffic flows in the route and road capacity and congestion alternative routes and propose mitigation measures, so that and what we can then do is we can then come to an assessment of how bad is the congestion problem on the route or routes being improved, receiving investment, and what could the scheme actually mean in terms of the change in congestion for motorists. So we're going to ask that people provide this information in the survey which will be sent out to bidders. Well, I just wanted to emphasise that we've intentionally kept this as light touch as possible. So we're not requiring you to do new surveys or to do any modelling. It should all be information that is readily available from your desk. So can you move on to slide number 20? So finally, where can I find some more guidance? So I know we've covered a lot of ground in the last half an hour or so, and I'm sure that you will feel that you haven't understood every word of this. But we do have a number of sources of guidance which hopefully will fill in any blanks that you have after this Q&A. As I say, we are going to be sending out value for money guidance for the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So this will set out what appraisal we're going to be expecting to be undertaken for tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and what inputs people need to input into AMAT and where they can find that information. So hopefully it will summarise what I've talked about earlier in terms of what inputs you need and where can I get them from. As Fraser mentioned, we have also recently published a generic AMAT user guidance, which is appropriate not just for the Emergency Active Travel Fund, but hopefully for all active travel investments or behaviour change programs. And so, if you've got further questions, that would be my next part of call. If you're a bit of a nerd and you want to understand how AMAT works and all the assumptions underlying it, then there's detailed guidance of all the underlying assumptions in the Transport Appraisal Guidance, the Active Mode unit. But also, we don't want you to feel that we're creating a huge amount of work for you. And so please do contact Fraser or myself if this seems like a lot of work. We'll be absolutely delighted to talk to you. So I've put the Walking and Cycling mailbox email address here. And if you've got follow-up questions which haven't been covered in this presentation or in user guidance, please do come to us, and we'd be absolutely delighted to talk to you. That's the end of the presentation. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks very much. And thanks also to Fraser for presenting. We're going to go straight into the Q&A now. Jeremy, just if you can respond as loudly as possible on your handset, that would really improve the audio. I know it's a bit tricky at the moment, but if you can speak as loud as possible, that would certainly help out the audience. So I'm going to introduce Rabina now from DFT. She's been carefully moderating the questions that have been coming through, and she's going to now ask those to both Jeremy and Fraser. and hopefully we can fit as many in the next half an hour or so. So over to you, Rabina.
Thanks, Daniel. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yes, can
Brilliant.
hear you fine.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, Jeremy and Fraser. As I think you've answered one of the key questions, a lot of people have been asking where can they find the AMAT tool and the guidance link. And we might want to just include that in a link when we publish this webinar live. So we'll make that available a bit more easily. So let's start off with a really good question here from Tim Thebe. So apologies if I pronounce individuals' names incorrectly, I'll do my best. So what BCR will you be expecting for emergency measures? Will there be a threshold pass? And related to that, somebody with the initials SS has asked what kind of projects have a good BCR or a low BCR? So I don't know who's best.
Shall I take that one? So there won't be. So yeah, really good questions. There won't be. There isn't a default threshold where we're just going to say we're going to cut off schemes below that are a certain value for money category. But the department will certainly look more favourably on those schemes which have higher value for money and are better aligned with the strategic objectives of the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So you're aware that the permanent secretary, who's the head honcho in each department, must write a letter to the Secretary of State if they're proposing investment which is likely to deliver poor value for money. So we generally try to avoid that, but that doesn't. There may be some reasons why some schemes that have that don't have the strongest value for money we may want to fund. So yes, there's not going to be. We don't have a hard and fast threshold. In terms of which types of interventions are likely to deliver the greatest value for money, I think I'd want to start by saying that that value for money isn't the only consideration that you should be considering when determining what you should be bidding for. So, I mean, I think you should be focusing on what are the strategic aims of the fund. In terms of actually which schemes are likely to deliver the most cycling and walking per pound spent, so if you look at the table which I put on slide 16, maybe if somebody can take us back there, you can see that this sets out what some kind of default assumptions. So our estimates for the average cost per additional stage generated. So you can see that certain types of interventions have a much lower cost per additional stage. These are just averages, and you should be noticing that you shouldn't only deliver those interventions with the lowest cost per stage, because actually probably an effective network will probably for walking and cycling will probably require a range of different interventions, and so actually you probably you probably do need cycling and walking routes. You probably do need some flagship cycling and walking links in addition to the parking and so forth. That was all I wanted to say. Fraser, do you anything more to add?
No, nothing to add from me.
Right, thank you. So next question, I might be able to answer this one. So Julie Barnes has said the intention for tranche 1 was quick delivery due to funding not being received yet. Delivery within 4 to 8 weeks specified will be challenging. Will DfT review timescales for T1 delivery? As far as I'm aware, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, the delivery start date starts from when the funding's been allocated. So I wouldn't be too worried about being able to deliver within the 4 to 8 weeks specified within bids. Okay, Shall I move on to the next question? So we have an interesting question here from Hannah Dayan. So for congestion levels, given that in the short term it may increase congestion in some cases, could this potentially reject innovative schemes to get people cycling?
So shall I take that one? So I think we are looking for schemes that are looking to encourage people to cycle and walk and to relocate road space away from motorists. We want to understand that whilst we want you to be ambitious, we want you also to have a plan how you're going to manage congestion for motorists, so that we're not stuffing up the road network. So as long as you've got good evidence that you've got mitigation measures in the longer term to actually manage any change in congestion for motorists, I don't think that should be a significant problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Steve Cartmel is asking for a clarification question here. So is the 2 million appraisal limit for individual schemes or for a programme of smaller schemes that total more than 2 million?
So it's so what I'm defining by a scheme is a package of investments that achieve that are aimed at achieving a certain objective. So a route-based scheme might be a package of measures along a particular route to promote cycling and walking. So that could be like new segregated cycle lanes with new signage and junction improvements and so forth. A program-wide scheme might be a number of individual investments over a wider geographic area, similar investments over a wider geographic area that are aimed at achieving a similar goal. So, for example, a program of improvements to junctions to make it safer for cyclists. So, I think I'm using the word scheme to mean program, a program of individual measures. I hope that makes it clearer.
Thank you. Okay, next question. We had a bit of a theme around schools. We had quite a few questions around schools. So this one's from Lucy Marstrand. She basically says traditional commute focused schemes have scored more highly. This has skewed investment and meant other types of trips, e.g. trips to schools, have not been considered or have been funded poorly in the past. So her question essentially is, how are secondary school trips weighted compared to the commute?
Shall I have a go? So in terms of the strategic aim of the fund, I don't think we've specifically mentioned. I don't think there is a particular objective to increase cycling for one purpose, cycling and walking for one purpose or another. So I think we care equally about increasing cycling and walking trips for travel to school compared to other purposes. In terms of the value for money assessment, I think that I think one of the limitations of the AMAT tool at the moment is that we're not able to capture health benefits for school children as a result of increased active travel. So if you're looking to introduce a scheme, if you're proposing a scheme which is specifically targeted at boosting travel to school, then I think it's really important that you set out that there's an health benefit to children, which AMAT hasn't quantified. And what we can do is we can then factor that into the overall value for money judgment. So, for example, if the scheme actually has a benefit cost ratio of 1.5, but we know we're actually missing a significant benefits, that we might want to say that actually the scheme is likely to deliver pretty high value for money, even though the benefit cost ratio isn't necessarily so high.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question, I think, Fraser, this one might be for you. I don't know if you can summarize it quickly, but Violet Rook is asking, what are the main changes to AMAT?
Essentially, we haven't changed the calculations themselves. The focus was mainly to make it improve the usability of the tool itself. The only updates have been made was to update some of the input data, which was kind of updated alongside all the rest of the transport appraisal guidance. So the calculations stay the same. It's just intended to make it easier to use. And that, yeah, I guess that's the reason why we've also published the AMAT user guidance as well, which kind of gives a step-by-step guide for how to use AMAT, to kind of highlight how what AMAT can do and what the limitations are. And it's a document that could be kind of a point of call if there's any uncertainty of how to complete a certain section of AMAT.
No, I don't know if we've lost Jeremy there.
No, I'm here. Hi.
Okay, brilliant. You don't want to add anything there?
No, that's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, so next question. We do have a bit of a theme here in terms of rural impacts. So we have a question from Lucy Barr, where she's asking, will rural councils fairly be able to compete with urban councils, particularly when their indicated allocation is under 2 million, for example, Somerset's case, and when they have one or more major town that would benefit from improvement in the schemes?
Can I answer that? So yeah, Lucy, I completely understand your point, but I mean, I know that more rural areas might have fewer people working on this, and so this is the reason that we set. We're saying that we're only requiring value for money assessments for schemes costing £2 million. So we'd expect that for those areas with lower indicative funding allocations, actually that this will mean they may not have to undertake a value for money assessment at all, or if you do, might only have to assess a couple of schemes. And what we've tried to do is to try and make AMAT as simple as possible, so that it requires a minimum of work to actually run it. So, for example, including default assumptions and providing a simplified way to estimate uplifts in cycling and walking trips and so forth. So, if you do need to use it for your schemes, we're hoping that we're talking minutes rather than hours of work to actually do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Next question. We have a bit of a theme around health impacts here. So Annabelle Precious is asking, are there any plans to include health impacts for children? And then Paul Osborne has asked, if AMAT can't include health benefits for children under 18, how should we appraise safe routes to schools and colleges?
Shall I have a go? And Fraser, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the issue is that the World Health Organization published on their website that currently there is no default. There is little or no evidence for the health impacts from active travel for children. Basically, because it's much more difficult to ascertain the causal impact of differences in active travel on health outcomes later to Gazette Live. So, given that the World Health, this is the view of the World Health Organization, we don't have any better evidence here in the department to improve on that at the moment. It was going to be something I was going to raise with Public Health England. So in light of recent events, I thought I wouldn't bother them too much at the moment. But as I say, I think that that if you've got schemes which are targeted at promoting cycling or walking to work, what you can do is you can quantify benefits to adults who are accompanying children, and quantify benefits for people with other journey purposes. And then I think you just need to report that there are non-monetized benefits to health benefits to children, but we just don't know how big they might be. If a scheme is once you've done that, if you've the scheme is likely to have a high BCR even without quantifying those impacts, then we don't need to do any further investigation into that. But we will factor that into the overall value for money judgment for those schemes. Fraser, is there anything else you think it's worth adding?
No, I think that gave a good summary.
Right. Thank you. Moving on then, next question, Matthew Page. I think AMAT also emits journey time savings for active mode users.
Could you say it again? I didn't quite hear that.
So he said he thinks AMAT also emits journey time savings for active mode users.
I think you're right. Yes. So I think that is one thing that we could have included. We could have included on our slide on what doesn't it quantify. So if there's reason to believe that people who are now cycling and walking would actually get to their destination a lot faster than they would have done before, then absolutely report that as a non-monetized impact.
Yeah, and just probably to add as well that there is some guidance in the transport appraisal guidance, which kind of covers the journey time savings relevant to active mode appraisal. But I agree. I think it should be, for this purposes, covered for as a non-monetized benefits. I think the purpose of AMAT was more to kind of calculate the benefits of increasing cycling and walking rather than improving or changes in journey time quality. Time savings, but yeah, I agree with Jeremy's approach.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, moving on. Susie Morrow, can you say more about neighbourhood traffic calming interventions, please?
Oh, okay. Neighbourhood traffic calming interventions. So I'm assuming that the question is, how would we use AMAT to assess the impacts of neighbourhood traffic calming interventions? So I don't know, this might include things like changing speed limits or introduction of kind of obstacles in the road to slow down traffic. So what I think we can assess those in AMAT as we could for intervention like new cycleways or footways, but it just requires a slightly different approach to estimate the number of trips with and without the scheme. So for these neighbourhood, so when I was talking about area-wide measures, what I was effectively what I meant was measures that included not things like neighbourhood traffic calming measures, and so I've included in the value for money guidance what evidence we could use to assess the number of cycling and walking trips with and without those without those measures. So you'll see on slide 16 that we have data for the average cost per additional cycling request for additional walking stage per year for neighbourhood traffic calming measures. So you can use, so using this uplift tool, which we're going to send out, you can use this to estimate the number of additional walking trips that will be generated by it.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Rachel Beasley has a really interesting question. She says, if the uplift tool shows that the same treatment would cause a larger uplift in one area other than another, does this risk causing a bias towards more affluent areas, which tend to be the ones with higher propensity to cycle, whereas the health benefits might be greater in the poorer areas?
Rachel, thank you. That's a really interesting question. So I think a couple of answers to that. So as part of developing the department's cycling walking infrastructure strategy model, or the CWIS model, we commissioned Transport for Quality of Life to do some analysis to estimate the what are the factors which affect people's willingness to cycle and walk in different areas. And we found that basically people are more willing to cycle and walk in more typically more dense urban areas than rural areas. So, for example, people's willingness to cycle is higher in an area which is flatter, has a higher population density, more people of working age who might be commuting using cycling, and also areas with lower levels of deprivation. So what the uplift tool does is it includes information about the level of intrinsic cycling and walking potential in different areas to adjust its forecast for the number of additional cycling and walking trips generated. So basically, the tool does predict that areas with, in general, urban areas are likely to achieve a larger increase in cycling and walking for a given intervention than would be the case if the same thing was delivered in a more rural area. However, I think you make a very valid point that actually health benefits could potentially be greater per extra cycling and walking trip in areas which maybe are more deprived, where people already have worse health outcomes. Currently, the tool doesn't take into account that the health impacts per additional trip might vary around the country. So if this is particularly an issue for your area or your scheme, then please do report this as a non-monetized impact. And this is something that we can factor into account when we're undertaking the value for money assessment. Final thing to say, we've recognised this is an issue with the tool at the moment, and we've been looking into ways how we can address this so that the tool can better reflect the potential health impacts around the country. So this is something on our to-do list. So yeah, thank you for the prompt, Rachel.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy, I'm just going to ask you to, I don't know if you're moving away from your telephone or it is your reception. Your voice every now and again seems to dip. So maybe
I'm really sorry. I'm right next to my telephone, but I will continue to try and speak loudly. So sorry.
Thank you. So we have another really good question here, Melanie Taylor. And I think it's probably worth going over this again. She's asked, can you please clarify that AMAT tool is only for schemes over 2 million? For those smaller authorities like ourselves at Blackburn with Darwin, do you advise we follow this guidance as well as a way of informing our value for money?
So yes, I can clarify that for tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund, we're only requiring schemes costing over £2 million, permanent schemes costing over £2 million, should be accompanied, that an appraisal needs to be undertaken for those. However, we encourage other people to use AMAT to assess the value for money of other schemes, so those for temporary schemes and those that cost less than £2 million. This could help to strengthen the case for funding for your schemes if you can show that they're actually good value for money, but we won't require it from each bidder.
Brilliant, thank you.
Rabina, it's Daniel here. We've got about 5 more minutes left, so maybe you can prioritise a couple more questions.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Sure. Okay. So we have a question here from Dragos H. Another important aspect: how best to approach the appraisal period. A scheme with a BCR of 1.7 appraised over 20 years can generate a score of almost 4 over 40 years. Is there anything to stop me from using a 40 years to prove high value for money?
Sorry, I'm hogging the airwaves. So that's something that we've tried to set out in our new user guidance. So the default assumption for so just to start for people's benefit, the appraisal period represents what we think is the likely lifespan of a proposed scheme. So it's how long that scheme will be in place and therefore generating benefits. The default assumption for cycling and walking schemes is that they would be around for about 20 years. However, if these schemes are being delivered to a standard which is comparable to road schemes, then potentially that might justify a longer period, potentially up to 60 years, which is what we normally use for road schemes. I think it's something really important to point out that in order for schemes to continue to deliver benefits, they're going to need to continue to be maintained and periodically the surface renewed. So actually, if you're assuming a scheme has a longer appraisal period, so you will also need to take into account the costs associated with maintenance and renewal. Fraser, anything else?
No, that seems fine to me.
Brilliant, thank you. Daniel, have I got time for 2 questions or just one?
It depends how quick the responses are, Rabina. But yeah, let's try and go for 2.
Sorry, I'll be quick.
Megan Hansen, so I can answer this one. Hi, what written supporting evidence will be expected? Will it follow the 5 cases of the 5 business case guidance? Yes, it will. So we will want the management, commercial, economic case. So that's that one. And then one last one. Does the tool consider climate change or sustainability appraisal? And that's from Mamta Lama.
Absolutely. Thank you for raising that. So yes, it does. So one of the impacts which is monetized in the AMAT is the environmental benefits from lower car use for people switching to active travel. So this includes benefits from carbon savings, improved air quality, in changes in noise pollution. So yes, that is one of the benefits from active travel that is quantified.
Right. Brilliant, thank you. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Rabina. Thank you so much for that. Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, we're coming to a close now. Thanks for Fraser and Jeremy presenting and responding to questions, and Rabina for facilitating the Q&A. We didn't cover all of the questions, and we will endeavour to get back to everyone who did raise a question in the very near future. So yeah, thanks so much for the DFT for making the time to present today on AMAT, and hopefully all of the attendees have found it useful and will be using it for schemes going forward. We will be continuing the Green Transport Recovery series tomorrow. There'll be an event tomorrow afternoon on managing speeds and default 20 mile per hour zone. So if you're interested in that, you can still sign up. Until then, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you very much.